I was responsible for taking care of the most venomous giant jellyfish in the world, unaware that I had long been targeted by this massive and beautiful creature. Everyone believed that highly dangerous mutated creatures could not obey humans, but my experimental subjects treated me like a god, because I was the only one who truly pitted these terrifying alien creatures, treating them like family. So while the subjects raised by other researchers were fierce and savage, mine were gentle and beautiful. However, to my surprise, Deputy Director Gu, relying on her family's power, took away the right to raise those subjects from me. My appeals to my superiors were fruitless. Then I heard that the jellyfish, which had been so docile and obedient in my hands, suddenly and viciously stung Gu Weiwei, causing her to lose an arm and become disabled. The district director was furious about this.
Why didn't you report that jellyfish with mature venom? And you hid its aggressiveness.
I was deeply shocked. That jellyfish had always been gentle, never touching me, and never even approaching me. But this time, the danger actually came from the jellyfish. I had raised this jellyfish for many years. Its venom had long been mature enough for experiments, but I never reported it, because during my most painful years after entering the base, it had always silently guarded and accompanied me. I knew how cruel the experiments were, and that they might even kill it, so I kept the fact of its maturity hidden. But such a gentle creature actually wanted to kill Gu Weiwei.
The Gu family is furious and is pressuring us. The base has decided to execute this jellyfish. Go back to the lab. This execution plan will be carried out by you.
The experimental subjects were very excited to see me. The young blue-ringed octopus looked in my direction with deep affection, and the young sea angel had long been crying, calling my name in a soft, trembling voice. But I couldn't bother to respond to them, and just walked straight to the deep water area. In a magnificent blue, the jellyfish slowly swam up from the depths, its translucent body soft and ethereal. Why did it turn out like this? I was confused, but I couldn't see through the marine creature behind the glass. I looked at that beautiful jellyfish through the glass. As my fingers traced across the glass panel, those delicate tentacles brushed against the transparent, hard glass, following my movements. Before releasing the venom, I opened the tank panel for the first time. The jellyfish floated up, carefully gathering its ribbons, ensuring not a single bit would touch its keeper. It leaned its soft head over. I touched its fragile bell and noticed it was trembling. Are you scared? Of course, it wasn't fear. This was its first time coming into direct contact with its keeper. It trembled as it controlled its tentacles, terrified of touching me.
Excuse me, can we begin?
Yes, we can. That mutated bluebottle jellyfish was far more venomous than they had imagined.
Is the release complete? Why is it completely unharmed?
Release is complete. It hasn't taken any damage. So the venom releases were increased to a second and third time, with the toxicity level growing stronger each time. But after 3 times, even though the jellyfish had melted away some of its body tissue, it miraculously adapted to those intense toxins.
Continue observing. It can actually adapt to this level of toxin. This is a major discovery.
After absorbing all the released venom, the jellyfish's body underwent some changes.
Abandon the execution plan immediately. Notify the team for this test subject. Launch a comprehensive test immediately. This is an unprecedented discovery for the base. Clear the area. Evict all unauthorized personnel immediately.
However, when I was asked to leave, the jellyfish fell into an unprecedented depression.
Something's wrong. The subject's vital signs are dropping rapidly. Stop her. Don't let her leave. Bring her back to the breeding tank immediately.
When I stood outside the glass, it became full of vitality once again and fight against those toxins. It's amazing. Falsely report to the outside that this jellyfish has died. To give the Gu family an explanation, all of its subsequent research and feeding will be entirely your responsibility. A few days later, I changed into a different uniform. My identity access changed from swiping a card to iris recognition, and I entered the tightly sealed, heavily defended Sector S. Manhwa brought a new notice issued by the base.
The blue-ringed octopus will be sent for a Level 4 Division Advancement Experiment. If it can survive this division test, it will also enter Sector S.
No. It's too dangerous.
You don't have the right to decide. Even we engineers have no way to interfere with the base's decisions.
But a Level 4 experiment, how could it be conducted on a Sector A creature?
The blue-ringed octopus's performance has been stunning. Its healing ability is incredibly fast. They believe that perhaps it had already mutated a long time ago.
But if it fails, he will die.
There's nothing we can do about it. We can only comply. Besides, This is just a notification, not a discussion.
I stiffened my body, frowning tightly as if thinking about something. After a long while, I said, I want to go see him. After being promoted to a high-level breeder, entering the lower-level area was so easy for me. From the moment I stepped into my former office area, I felt a pair of eyes staring at me. The handsome, sculpture-like blue-ringed octopus youth was looking at me deeply from behind the glass. His captivating eyes were full of longing, but I ignored his deep affection and walked straight past him to the sea angel's breeding tank. The delicate, pale sea angel youth had red-rimmed eyes. He obediently climbed out of the tank, held my hand, his docile face full of obedience and dependence. I gently stroked his hair. The youth looked up.
I missed you.
The boy clumsily and recklessly expressed his love. This was what the sea angel liked most, and what the blue-ringed octopus hated most. Amidst the sea angel's reluctant crying, I pulled my hand away and closed the lid of the incubator. Then, under the expectant gaze of the blue-ringed octopus, I walked straight past him without looking sideways. The pitiful blue-ringed octopus watched eagerly as I walked further away.
Why won't you look at me? Why are you ignoring me?
He had thought his keeper would come pat his head after getting close to the sea angel boy and smile at him, but there was not a single glance.
Did I do something wrong? Did I make her mad?
Countless suckers pressed against the glass tank, drooping from initial joy to helpless dejection. The dangerous and terrifying creature hung his head like a puppy abandoned by its owner. The light in his eyes died out, and his expression grew increasingly angry. However, in his most desperate moment, the keeper he longed for returned. Do you want to come to me? Do you want to come with me? Level 4 splitting experiment. Survive. And you can see me again. These words seemed to stimulate his potential. His eyes filled with a deep, terrifying obsession.
Go find her. Survive. And I can go find her. I must go find her.
I turned around, leaving the young man gazing blankly at me behind, and walked toward Sector S without looking back. After seeing the blue-ringed octopus's nearly maddened eyes, I felt somewhat confident he would probably do everything in his power to endure all the torture and survive this horrific experiment. The blue-ringed octopus subject was sealed inside a water tank with layers of metal walls, bound by layer upon layer of chains. Under the escort of a massive convoy armed with laser weapons, he was sent into the mysterious and dangerous Sector S. As soon as they entered the testing space, all personnel quickly evacuated. The sealed tank slowly opened under the control of automated equipment. Behind the screen, the bioengineers standing by, silently watching the movement in the tank. Soon, broad, wet tentacles slowly reached out over the edge of the tank. It was a half-blue-ringed octopus creature with the appearance of a handsome young man. His hair was a dark, inky green, like a statue of a deity carved by an ancient Greek artist. His movements were slow, and beneath those bizarre tentacles with terrifying destructive power, there was actually a hint of elegance. After stepping completely out of the tank, his eyes slowly darted around, as if searching for something.
What is he looking for?
I don't know. Maybe he's observing the environment.
He doesn't look like he's observing. More like he's searching.
This is clearly one of the creatures with the highest danger index, so why does he seem completely non-aggressive right now? He's even strangely docile.
Alright, prepare to initiate the split.
Let me in. With me there to stimulate him, subject blue-ringed octopus will have an easier time surviving this test. However, the armed personnel remained expressionless, completely ignoring me. At the same time, a group of people arrived at the end of the corridor. They wore higher-level uniforms. The man leading them had wrinkles around his eyes, but he still looked vigorous. He wore thin, gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose and was looking down at a light screen. This was one of the senior professors of Sector S. I remembered his surname was Su. Under the respectful gestures of the armed personnel, Professor Su walked in expressionlessly. Professor Su, I am the handler for subject blue-ringed octopus in this experiment. I can help him pass the split test smoothly. However, the professor didn't even glance at me out of the corner of his eye and just walked right in. The laboratory hatch closed before my eyes once again. After the first phase of the split experiment ended, the half-blue-ringed octopus subject didn't seem to have any injuries.
He actually doesn't have a single scratch.
Continue raising the attack level.
Sharp laser weapons swept out chaotic, irregular beams of light, most of which he dodged. Occasionally, when they hit him, the wounds quickly regenerated and the injured areas healed rapidly. And after the second phase of the cutting experiment, explosives were activated. The entire observation area was covered in smoke amidst frantic flashes of light. It was almost impossible to see what was happening inside. The testers behind the screen used infrared imaging to observe the young man dodging swiftly. The damage he took was much less than expected.
Amazing. Why was he previously classified in Area A?
Phase 3 testing. Highly toxic poison was released. While quickly dodging the venom, he accidentally got some on a few tentacles. After being poisoned, they quickly turned black and rotted. In the nick of time, the highly intelligent creature severed its own tentacles to avoid the poison. His speed slowed down significantly, and his regeneration rate also dropped. The test chamber almost turned into a pile of ruins. Someone reported,
Professor, there's no movement.
Professor Su stared intently at the screen. He raised his hand and pushed up his glasses, his index finger lightly rubbing his chin. Let me in. I can help him pull through. Professor Su frowned briefly and looked over. Believe me. Save him. I can help him pull through.
This female breeder. Why does she look a bit familiar?
The assistant beside him suddenly leaned in, taking out a light pad and pulling up a bunch of data. Professor Su looked down at it. It was the testing process of the mutated bluebottle jellyfish that had previously been promoted to his class. A strange light suddenly flashed in his eyes.
Let her through.
Althorn.
What is she saying?
She's calling Althorn. That sounds like a name.
She actually gave the test subject a name. How ridiculous. A naive, ignorant, and fearless female breeder. This is too exaggerated, isn't it? Vital signs are rising.
Professor Su looked over. A cold gleam flashed across his icy glasses. On the screen, the radio wave indicating signs of life slowly jumped into a slight curve. The vital signs are really recovering. The biological signal spectrum of the experimental subject has changed a bit. Althorn. Wake up. I kept calling out. Amidst the gentle calls, something moved among the wreckage. From beneath a piece of shattered biological tissue, an arm, pale as a plaster sculpture, with an imperceptible hint of blue, slowly reached out. Althorn. I'm here. Accompanied by the gentle calls, the arm struggled to climb up. The pale, broken young man slowly crawled up. The battered young man's eyelashes trembled slightly, and he reached out his hand toward the person behind the glass panel from afar.
Row.
He called softly, with a heartbreaking sense of fragility. Even though that was a delicate aura that shouldn't belong to such a formidable creature. Behind the glass, my eyes were moist, so sad that I was almost in tears. The half-blue-ringed octopus young man was so sad he couldn't breathe. The sharp, needle-like pain in his chest far exceeded any splitting attack.
Row. Did I make her sad? Then I would rather suffer more torment than see her sad.
Come here. It's over. The young man looked at me, so full of remorse and pity that he couldn't breathe. 10 years ago, I lost all my family in a shipwreck. I only had Moi, who grew up with me in the orphanage, and these experimental subjects who trusted me absolutely.
Row.
He called my name hesitantly, but the glass panel reflected his figure. Battered, dirty, broken. He approached with joy, but felt a deep sense of inferiority the moment he saw his own reflection. He looks ugly right now. He thought of the delicate, pretty sea angel boy his keeper liked, his eyes full of inferiority and timidity. The blue-ringed octopus lowered his head. His body, which had just wanted to get a little closer, shrank back again. He awkwardly covered his face with his hands. Althorn, don't be afraid. Put your hands down. Come to me. Under my gentle calling, the dying young man slowly released his hands, revealing that beautiful, delicate face with a hint of longing in his eyes. I was also very patient, gently comforting him through a pane of transparent glass. It's okay. Everything is fine now. Come to me. He shifted toward me behind the glass, his relatively intact tentacles carefully pressed against the glass, as if trying to touch me. His tenacious vitality was astonishing.
He looks like a tamed pet dog.
How could a cold-blooded creature be tamed? They don't have emotions, right?
Professor Su pulled up my file.
She was previously the best keeper in Sector A. She already has one case of a higher organism advancing to Sector S under her care. It's that mutated blue bottle box jellyfish you know about. This one in front of us is the second. A masterpiece even more perfect than that jellyfish.
At this moment, everyone was immersed in the joy of the experiment's success. The degree of success this time far exceeded their previous imaginations. The experimental subject's level rose again and again, reaching the SS+ level. Unprecedented. Everyone was as excited as if they had witnessed a miracle. Professor Su gazed at the figure below for a long time, a strange glimmer appearing in his eyes. His cold voice seemed somewhat out of place in the massive observation room.
Remove the isolation panel.
What?
Remove the protective panel. Turn the weapons around. Attack her.
The blue-ringed octopus was stunned for a moment, sensing the danger. The next second, his pitch-black pupils suddenly contracted. He swiftly pulled me into his arms, using his most vulnerable humanoid upper body to shield me. Cold, pale blue blood splattered on my face. I stared blankly with my eyes wide open. The roaring sound was deafening. The half-human youth holding me tightly trembled in pain, curling his body to protect me even more securely. Tentacles took the place of his hands, covering my ears to block out that terrifying shattering noise. The youth held me, filled with pain, shock, and fury. How dare they hurt her? Amidst the ruins and rubble, newly formed tentacles quickly wrapped around me, carrying me as he dodged at lightning speed. I felt like I was imprisoned in an airtight cocoon. Layer upon layer of tentacles enveloped me seamlessly. Immediately after, a sense of weightlessness hit me. The blue-ringed octopus was moving rapidly, so fast that even inside the cocoon, I felt the world spinning. What happened? The half-octopus youth's speed surpassed all recorded mutant mollusks. Under high-speed infrared cameras, only his shadow could be faintly captured. The burning of his rage caused new tentacles to burst forth. I was held tightly against his body, shrouded by layers of tough tentacles. Once those tentacles were cut by attacks, new ones would swiftly fill the gaps. He was protecting me almost hermetically. And when his anger reached a certain point, the situation reversed. The half-octopus youth went from fleeing to slaughtering. He frantically destroyed several launch ports. The hard, high-density, thick metal walls were smashed with countless terrifying marks. Even the layered observation panels showed cracks.
Professor, it's not safe here anymore.
Someone raised their head from the bizarre scene.
Things were about to spiral out of control. He was no longer the originally numbered species. If he hadn't been protecting that human breeder, he likely would have torn through the space and broken out by now.
The data has broken through all expectations. It's unbelievable. This is the most outstanding experimental subject to date.
On the screen, the gloomy, terrifying young man raised his head. His dark green eyes stared straight ahead, filled with a murderous aura. He was looking at the camera. Professor Su felt that the test subject was looking at him through the lens. That bone-chilling coldness shook his spirit and sparked an intense interest in him.
It's a success.
Professor Su finally spoke, but no one was excited anymore, because things had reached a point that only brought them fear. Could the standard incubation area in Sector S still contain him? However, it seemed this wasn't the only crisis. A massive explosion echoed from the deepest, heavily sealed part of Sector S. The hollow space vibrated, as if some subterranean beast was tearing through space to crawl to the surface. Professor Su looked away from the screen, staring blankly down at the alarm, his face suddenly turning pale. The joy and excitement from just a moment ago vanished completely.
Special Control Zone. Level 1 alarm.
At this moment, even Professor Su's face showed fear. That meant, perhaps something truly terrible had happened.
Ro, wake up. You can't sleep.
Someone was constantly calling me. The blue-ringed octopus felt the person in his arms move. He hurriedly loosened his tightly wrapped tentacles and saw the fragile keeper he cared so much about. I struggled to crawl out of his embrace, resting my head on his arm, panting. The young man was at a loss for what to do, his hovering fingers carefully touching my face. His voice was pitifully quiet.
Ro.
I raised my head and saw his handsome face full of guilt and pain. Was he crying?
It's all my fault.
It's okay. I don't blame you. I patted his arm and sat up a little straighter. The untimely sound of the loudspeaker rang out again. MOE?
Your blue-ringed octopus has lost control. The medical team can't get close, so can you crawl out by yourself?
I looked up at the blue-ringed octopus in confusion. He instantly dropped his gloomy look and looked at me quietly and obediently, justifying his refusal to let anyone near. They hurt Ro. I remember the glass panel suddenly retracting and dangerous weapons all aimed at me. They wanted to trade my life for the experimental subject's evolution. I closed my eyes, leaning against the blue-ringed octopus's arm, my heart turning cold. But the young man's face was filled with overwhelming joy. He didn't even know where to put his hands. The speaker emitted a faint static sound.
Wake up, sis. Your subject looks really off right now.
I fluttered my eyelids and looked at the blue-ringed octopus. His dark green eyes looked back at me, carrying a hint of irrepressible joy. All right. Let me go. The blue-ringed octopus immediately let go in regret. Thank you. You saved me, blue-ringed octopus. It's all thanks to you. The blue-ringed octopus blinked slowly, his mind going blank with joy. I touched his tentacle. Blue-ringed octopus. You can keep following me now. After saying goodbye to the blue-ringed octopus, I was finally carried away on a stretcher. After taking a shower, I sat pitifully on the bed in the monitoring area, wrapped in a blanket. Moe rushed in carrying a late-night snack.
That Professor Sue. He wanted you dead.
I remained silent and didn't speak.
But he ended up running away. Can you believe it? He looked really scared.
Could something major have happened in Sector S? After cursing out the professor, Moe couldn't help but remark.
Isn't your subject a bit too clingy? Other subjects would love to kill their keepers. Only yours. Every single one is a clingy mess. And beautiful, obedient clingy messes at that.
I couldn't help but laugh. The blue-ringed octopus is still young. He was worried about me.
He hatched just over 2 years ago. He is indeed young. But your blue-ringed octopus was really fierce just now. He severely injured several waves of people, and they still couldn't take you away from him. If Professor Sue had gotten you killed today, I reckon he would have torn the base apart.
I drank the warm chicken soup without saying a word.
But in the end, he still listened to you. He let go the moment you told him to. Seeing that makes me want to try raising a subject myself.
Moe rambled on for a while, before reluctantly saying goodbye to me.
I'll get going then. Get some rest.
Early the next morning, before entering my office, I saw a few anxious-looking security guards standing in front of the lab, holding heavy weapons. They looked like they wanted to say something but held back. I gave them a puzzled look, opened the heavy blast-proof metal door, and walked in. A massive tank had been added to the office. The handsome young man floating inside the glass tank saw me come in, his eyes lighting up slightly. He raised a hand and opened the tank lid. His expressionless, handsome face carried obvious anticipation. I walked over, took a bag of ordinary store-bought candy out of my bag, unwrapped a piece, and said, "Open your mouth." The young man obediently opened his mouth and submissively let me feed him the candy. He narrowed his eyes in pure enjoyment.
This keeper is amazing. Escorting this subject here was an absolute nightmare.
At the time, the security guards watched the young man open the lid with one hand and slowly stand up from the tank. His lightning-fast tentacles instantly disarmed them, sending weapons clattering to the floor. Just a split second before death arrived, a female bioengineer walked by. Looking at the devastation on the ground, she calmly said,
"You'd better follow orders. They're taking you to Sector S. Don't you want to see Aero?"
The young man's terrifying tentacles were currently wrapped around 2 people.
Aro.
Besides, Aro will definitely be angry if you do this. You wouldn't want to see her angry, would you? You know she'll ignore you if she gets mad.
The subject pondered for a second, his pupils trembling slightly. Then, the already terrified security guards watched helplessly as the subject threw them to the ground like trash and sat back down inside the tank, casually raising a hand to close the hatch. The engineer named Moe looked at them with slight contempt and said,
"Hurry up and deliver him."
The security guards snapped back to reality, quickly picking up their scattered heavy weapons and cautiously continuing the transport. Because I hadn't slept well last night, my eyelids felt heavy, and I fell asleep resting on the desk. I unconsciously hugged my arms, feeling a bit cold. Half asleep, someone gently draped a jacket over my shoulders. However, the jacket was soaked with water. Covering myself with it not only made me colder, but it was also wet and uncomfortable. I opened my eyes, swatted the hand on my shoulder, and said flatly, "Go back." The tip of a translucent tentacle hooked a strand of my hair, then obediently retreated under my reproachful gaze. I looked down, and found the floor covered in water. Large, translucent tentacles almost completely carpeted the office. The young man stared at me with gentle, dark green eyes. I rubbed my temples in exasperation and said, "Go back to your glass tank." He called out softly, seemingly trying to buy more time by my side, "Be good." When Moe came in, In the glass incubation tank next to me, the handsome tentacled young man was staring at me motionlessly. This ultimate killing machine looks inexplicably pitiful.
What did you do to him?
I hit his hand. Moe paused for a moment and looked over at him. The young man had one hand resting over the other. His pale, exquisite face completely expressionless. Yet his grievance was inexplicably obvious at a glance. The young man looked toward Moe, his dark green eyes faintly conveying something. Being stared at like this, besides fear, there was also a hint of pressure. She turned her head and said seriously,
"How could you hit someone? Apologize right now. Look how wronged he feels."
I turned around. The blue-ringed octopus was looking at me eagerly. I couldn't help but laugh. "I really don't know what to do with you." I walked over to his tank and opened the lid. He immediately straightened up, leaning out of the glass enclosure. Those dark green, almost black eyes looked at me. I don't know why this handsome cold-blooded creature is so clingy. I suppressed a smile and said softly, "I'm sorry." "Are you angry?" "Let me see. Does it hurt?" "I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Can you forgive me?" The blue-ringed octopus pursed his lips and reservedly looked away. I took a piece of candy out of my pocket, unwrapped it, and fed it to him. The young man obediently opened his mouth. His face remained expressionless, but his entire body radiated joy. Seeing how happy he was, Moe reminded him,
"I'm the one who made her apologize to you. I'm on your side. Shouldn't you thank me?"
The blue-ringed octopus instantly frowned, extremely dissatisfied with her interference, and shot her a cold, warning look.
"All right."
She had spoken out of turn again. I couldn't help but laugh. After coaxing the little blue-ringed octopus, I wanted to go visit the sea angel again. Moe asked,
"Are you going to Sector A?"
"Yes. That child is timid. If I don't go back for a long time, he might go on a hunger strike." I walked all the way to Sector A. The security guards stationed outside the sector lowered their weapons and opened the gates. Under their silent gaze, I slowly walked inside. I was greeted by a former colleague from Area A, Zhang Ning, who I heard was recently promoted to deputy director.
Xiao Tang, you're here.
Zhang Ning stopped walking and greeted me, which was rare.
Are you here to see your former subject?
Yes. I made some nutrient solution for him. Zhang Ning used to ignore me, so I didn't expect him to take the initiative to greet me now, even showing a smile.
Oh, right. I've been in charge of your number 11 lately. He's quite stubborn.
I heard he was on a hunger strike every day a while ago, so I wanted to come see him.
He's doing pretty well. Maybe he was already fine by the time I took over.
Oh, really? I thought he'd be sad for a while.
Cold-blooded creatures don't have feelings. At most, he just got a bit familiar with you. He'll forget in the blink of an eye.
I frowned slightly, feeling that his words were particularly uncomfortable to hear. Then I'll go see him. Zhang Ning stepped sideways, seemingly preparing to stop me.
He's resting. He just had a test today.
This man kept stopping me, but I surprisingly had no grounds to refuse. Just then, the alarm suddenly sounded. A sharp alarm echoed through the empty, wide metal corridor. At the same time, my communication terminal rang. Moe called me, her voice anxious.
"Come back quickly. Area S is going on lockdown. Something's wrong with the blue-ringed octopus."
What happened to him?
"He's very manic and a bit out of control. He just broke the tank and escaped, injuring several of our colleagues." "Mianji, come back quickly. It's not just the blue-ringed octopus that's out of control. There's a problem with the entire Area S."
Could the blue-ringed octopus's loss of control be related to the sudden alarm? I hung up the phone, my expression grave.
It's okay. Just give me the nutrient solution. I'm in charge of number 11 now anyway. Go take care of your important business. I'll pass on your regards to him.
I hesitated for a moment. I could always come see the sea angel another day. "Sorry for the trouble, Deputy Director Zhang."
Don't mention it. Go on and get to work.
His attitude seemed friendly enough. I handed the items over to him and quickly turned to hurry back to Sector S. The man held the sealed box containing the nutrient solution, his smile slowly fading. He raised his hand and opened the box. Looking at the half-tube of pale yellow nutrient solution inside, he held it up and examined it for a moment, then tossed it into a nearby trash can. Then he turned and walked toward the Sector A laboratory. Inside the glass vessel, the pale, slender boy had his back to the door, hugging his legs as he sank to the bottom of the tank. This was one of the most harmless creatures in the entire experimental sector. He was a purely healing entity, posing absolutely no threat to humans. He could even become a life-saving medicine. Hearing the door close, the boy glanced over, then floated up from the bottom of the water with a look of anticipation.
Well.
Zhang Ning took a deep breath, maintaining the fake expression on his face.
I went to ask her, but she didn't want to come over. I think she probably just doesn't want to see you.
The sea angel's eyes suddenly turned red. It was the first time he had reacted so strongly to the outside world, almost climbing out of the cultivation tank.
Impossible. Ro would never refuse to come see me.
The blue-ringed octopus and the jellyfish have leveled up. When I went to find her, she was keeping those two creatures company. She really likes those two creatures. It seems she doesn't like you anymore. She doesn't want you anymore.
How could the innocent boy detect the malice dripping from the man's words? He couldn't accept it. He was furious, even bordering on losing control.
Impossible. She wouldn't abandon me.
So these cold-blooded creatures really do cry.
Zhang Ning watched with great interest, his sadistic desires quietly surging. The scale of the disaster in Sector S this time was even worse than I had imagined. Many of the metal blast doors outside the labs had been destroyed, leaving behind pitch-black, hideous voids. The ground was littered with shattered metal and glass broken from impact. I was horrified. The incubation pods that were supposed to hold the test subjects were empty and violently torn apart. Just what exactly happened here? I looked up, and behind a massive glass enclosure over 10 meters tall at the corner floated many researchers in silver uniforms. Their bodies were soaked in the dark blue seawater. I covered my mouth, suppressing my churning stomach acid, but unexpectedly, my phone rang again. I instantly hit the answer button, terrified that something might hear the piercing ringtone. Moye's voice came through, faintly trembling.
Where are you right now?
I held my breath and lightly tapped the microphone, hearing those two soft taps of my fingertip.
You're in Sector S. Ro, get out of there quickly. All the pods in Sector S have ruptured. The test subjects have escaped en masse. If you can find a chance to leave, leave immediately.
But the blue-ringed octopus.
Forget about him. He's very strong. He can survive. But you will die.
I nodded and was just about to agree when I suddenly noticed a huge shadow on the ground in front of me. A chill crept up my back inch by inch. I slowly looked up and saw a massive, hideous, grayish-brown creature with spider-like arthropod legs hanging upside down right above my head. It had no head. 6 eerie eyes embedded in the middle of its abdomen stared straight at me. In an instant, my whole body tensed up, and I turned and ran. That giant creature also moved its long, hard arthropod legs in hot pursuit. I ran past the corner. Gritting my teeth, I threw my shoe as far as I could. The sound of the heel hitting the ground attracted the pursuing creatures. They abruptly ran in that direction. I took the opportunity to turn and run. I wanted to leave Sector S, but despairingly realized I had lost my sense of direction while fleeing. I didn't know how long I had been running. Slowly coming to my senses, I looked up and found myself in an open-air space. The sky above was covered with heavy, dark clouds. Where on earth was I? The dark clouds hung oppressively in the sky. Soon, the patter of rain began to sound. I walked in a daze, noticing thick, towering walls standing at the edge of this clearing. I slowly looked around, and a layout formed in my mind. This was the hexagonal plaza. In the center of the plaza was a massive glass structure, tens of meters high. The giant glass took up half my field of vision. This was the most dangerous place in the entire base. I had heard of this giant water tank. Rumor had it that the bottom of the tank connected to the ocean, reaching hundreds of meters deep. Inside was locked the most powerful and terrifying experimental subject the base had ever seen. But right now, things were out of control. I hurriedly searched for a new escape route, attempting to leave this place. However, as I walked, I noticed something on the ground oozing pale blue blood. A translucent, faintly blue severed tip. This was the blue-ringed octopus's tentacle. He had been attacked. A clap of thunder rolled across the land, suddenly illuminating everything. A massive shadow appeared on the ground. I looked back in horror. Not far away, a colossal beast was crawling forward. Its entire body was covered in wrinkled, grayish-brown skin. It had no eyes on its face, only 2 nostril-like things sniffing the scent on the ground. On its sides were enormous oracles. I had nowhere to run, so I huddled next to the giant glass tank, carefully hiding my body. Behind me, inside the transparent glass, was pitch-black, gloomy, endless seawater. During the escape, at some point, my foot was cut by glass and started bleeding. The monster smelled the blood and walked toward me step by step. Powerless to fight back, I could only squeeze my eyes shut. However, the expected pain never came. Someone dragged me into the water, leaving only my eyes and nose exposed. With a loud crash, a heavy object hit the ground. The massive beast lowered its head, sniffing the spot where I had fallen.
Shoo! Quiet. They can't see.
This faint whisper inexplicably brought a sense of security. The monster didn't approach the pool. It just sniffed the ground, and finding no prey, slowly dragged its massive body away. Just as he said, they couldn't see, but my attention was irresistibly drawn to the person behind me. Wet hair fell on my shoulder, a pale gold winding its way down. Between the long, pale fingers was a crystal-clear membrane, its contours as beautiful as a work of art. The person behind me seemed to move, then said softly,
"You're hurt."
I turned my head back. A breathtakingly beautiful face was right in front of me, striking me with its visual impact. "It's you. You're the merman from Sector S." The merman gave a faint mem. "Why are you hiding here?" I looked at the bottomless giant tank, feeling a bit scared. "Is there something dangerous in here?" The merman lifted his eyelashes and gave me a half-smile.
"Scared."
I nodded honestly. The slender, beautiful merman looked completely out of place in this giant tank, so I didn't think it was meant to hold him. Plus, the merman showed no aggression, leaving only one possibility. My eyes filled with pity. He might be food for whatever creature was kept in this tank. He swam a circle around me and leaned back in, his eyes cast down wearily. Even as food, he was willing to lend a helping hand when I was in danger. I thought to myself, this is a kind merman. I'll take you out of here.
I can't leave.
Why? Only the faint sound of metal clashing could be heard from underwater. A long, magnificent fishtail broke through the water, lifting a broad, translucent tail fin. However, what was shocking was that, on this beautiful fishtail, a silver, metallic chain, 3 fingers wide, pierced right through it. An unknown black substance snaked along the chain.
I'm trapped.
This black stuff. What exactly is it? It's so cold, so painful. This thing is much more dangerous than I imagined. I'm sorry. I really can't undo it. The structure of this chain is beyond my abilities. I don't want you to get hurt.
It's okay. I don't mind.
The merman swam over. I saw him reach out his long arms and lift me onto the shore.
The water is very cold. You should sit up there.
Thank you. I couldn't help but look into his eyes. Those platinum silver eyes seemed to carry some mysterious allure. Just making eye contact with him made me feel a wave of dizziness. The next second, my eyes suddenly widened. At some point, the merman had grabbed my foot, then lowered his eyes and kissed it while I watched in shock. I froze for a few seconds before reacting and trying to break free, but he held onto my ankle. The merman lifted his eyelashes, looking at me expressionlessly, then silently kissed my injured skin. The wounds originally pierced by shattered glass were already healed. Finally, the merman let go of me. His expression remained indifferent and aloof. He silently swam to the side, lowered his head, and rested it on his arms. Looking lazy and exhausted, I realized belatedly, "Were you just treating my wound?" The merman didn't speak, giving a slight nod in response. I felt even more awkward. At this moment, the out-of-control test subjects roaming the hexagonal plaza seemed to have left. However, rescue personnel still hadn't arrived in Sector S. The base didn't seem to have launched a rescue operation either. I remembered MOE mentioning she was also in the hexagonal plaza, so I decided to take a gamble. Supporting myself against the glass wall, I slowly stood up and said to the merman, "I'm going to find my companion. Thank you for treating my wound just now. I hope you get better soon too."
Don't go.
He reached out his hand but grabbed nothing. I insisted on leaving and had already walked a few meters away. The giant glass structure was located in the center of the hexagonal plaza, with unknown creatures imprisoned in the water. Staying here wasn't a good choice. If I waited for rescue to restore order, I would apply to my superiors to transfer the merman to my own lab. But the more important thing right now was to leave here and survive. However, in the hexagonal plaza that had been quiet for a long time, a sudden clicking sound echoed. I instinctively looked up. What's that sound? I saw several long, narrow arthropod legs crawling rapidly toward me. It was that sea spider. I backed away in a panic, but stepped on some slime, my foot slipping. I suddenly lost my balance, falling backward face up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the terrifying spider leap into the air toward me. It was too late. The sound of flesh being pierced rang out, and warm, cool liquid splashed onto my face. I kept my eyes open, but my brain shut down for a moment. In the nick of time, this merman I had only met twice actually appeared, blocking in front of me. I looked down, seeing that incredibly beautiful, magnificent fish tail pierced by the terrifying dark brown arthropod leg. My eyes widened, unable to speak a single word. I looked at the merman in shock and asked blankly, "Why?" The merman didn't answer me. His jewel-like eyes lost their luster. His arms went limp, and he collapsed weakly into my embrace, crashing right into me. "Wake up!" After that incredibly vicious strike, the sea spider suddenly tensed up, pulled out its blood-stained limb, and quickly retreated. I didn't notice any of that. The merman was slumped over me. His heavily injured tail was a full 3 meters long. No matter how slender and frail he looked, when he pressed down on me, I clearly felt the heavy weight. His body was very cold. Wake up! How are you hurt this badly? Hold on, I'll stop the bleeding for you. No, this won't stop it. I'll hide you first. Wait for me here.
She's leaving. Why is she still leaving? Leaving my world. Even though it's so dangerous.
Don't be afraid. I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to find a cart to get you out of here. Otherwise, you'll die. If I don't make it back alive. Wait until order is restored here. Take this and find an engineer named Mui. She'll take care of you.
But aren't you afraid of dying?
No one isn't afraid of dying.
Whether I live or die, does it have anything to do with you?
Yes. Don't overthink it. I covered him with the seaweed in my hands, concealing the merman's magnificent yet fragile figure. Then I ran toward the ring zone. I remembered seeing an electric cargo cart on the way here. My movements were very light, but I didn't realize that many terrifying figures were slowly emerging behind me. Dark, slimy tentacles reached out menacingly from the floor, the walls, and the unseen shadows. However, before they could touch the woman's back, they heard an indescribable sound. An elegant, ethereal murmur was emitted at a special frequency, audible only to the alien creatures from the deep sea. The sinister, unknown entities seemed as if someone had pressed the pause button, freezing in mid-air for 2 seconds before quietly retreating. At the edge of the giant glass tank in the center of the hexagonal plaza, a pale arm reached out. The merman slowly and methodically sat up. Humans were a species that seemed easy to understand, yet were slightly more complex than he had imagined. But he had to admit, the human's concern for his life put him in a good mood. After brushing off the remaining algae on his body, the merman merely raised his hand. A series of crisp clicking sounds rang out. The spider-like creature returned. The arthropod, which was several times larger than the merman, tensed up rigidly, as if its body were shackled by something invisible. The merman lowered his eyes languidly, spreading his chained tail and turning it toward the sea spider. The creature's hard brown limbs raised uncontrollably, piercing its legs right where the chains passed through. With a clatter, the chains slid right out. Despite enduring such horrific trauma, the merman only fluttered his eyelashes. Having finished its task, the sea spider tried to leave quietly, but its will was invisibly stripped away by something, and it crawled straight toward the endless, pitch-black pool. I felt like my search for the cart was a narrow escape from death. From time to time, I could see bizarre and terrifying creatures crawling in the corridors. My journey back with the electric cart seemed very dangerous, but I didn't know that many things in the dark were also avoiding me. Even when they accidentally crossed paths with me, they had to pretend not to see me, looking in another direction and calmly passing by. I had no idea, thinking I had dodged one danger after another, completely oblivious to the superb acting skills of the experimental subjects. I didn't expect that in the short time I was gone, the merman would become so extremely fragile. He was already unconscious. He was very weak, his eyes tightly closed. Hearing my footsteps, his dead silent eyes slowly opened. His platinum silver eyes reflected my silhouette. I found a cart. I raised my hand to support his shoulder, and the merman took the opportunity to grab my arm. Working together, we finally managed to pull him onto the cart. As I started the electric cart, the merman slowly lifted his eyelashes. He woke up. This merman truly makes my heart ache. I lowered my voice and said to him, "I'll take you to my office first. There's medicine there." The merman nodded without any hesitation. This unconditional trust even surprised me. I navigated my way through the massive and perilous hexagonal plaza. Fortunately, I didn't encounter any bizarre creatures this time. A faint red glow flickered in the corner of the narrow metal corridor. The cameras were hidden in the dark, quietly capturing everything. After we left, a bizarre creature covered in suckers crawled across the smooth metal wall, hanging upside down from the ceiling, and easily crushed the camera with the flickering red light. The journey to the lab was almost unbelievably smooth. I pushed the half-conscious mermaid inside, then carefully closed the door. The giant glass tank that took up an entire wall wasn't broken. The jellyfish was still swimming perfectly fine inside. Its originally calm state became frantic the moment it noticed I had returned. Yet, a second later, it sensed some kind of danger approaching. Its soft ribbons raised sharp stinging cells, even showing an intention to strike. "Little jellyfish, quiet down. It's very dangerous outside. But the usually obedient jellyfish was relentless, its ribbons swiping rapidly across the glass. I attributed the jellyfish's abnormal behavior to the base losing control. After cleaning my hands, I put on clean rubber gloves, took out wound disinfectant, and carefully disinfected the merman's severed tail. I whispered in his ear. His body was slightly curled up. I sighed and muttered to myself, "He's clearly an experimental subject from Sector S. How can he be so fragile?" In his unconscious state, the merman seemed to feel the pain. The thin muscles covering his bones tensed up, as if trying to resist the pain. "Don't be afraid. It will be over soon. I'm treating your wounds. Don't be nervous." I could only apply some medicine for a simple treatment to fully heal the merman's tail. I could only wait until Sector S resumed normal operations. The jellyfish swam anxiously, its soft ribbons constantly striking the glass wall, trying to stop my actions, as if what I was saving right now wasn't a beautiful merman, but a heinous devil. I had a terrible headache. The jellyfish had always been good, arguably the most docile and worry-free of all my test subjects. "Jellyfish. It's okay. I'm here." The jellyfish immediately contracted its bell and came to my side, its ribbons pressing against my palm through the glass. "Something very dangerous happened today. It's still very dangerous outside right now. He saved me. Now he's hurt. Shouldn't I help him?" I was like a parent educating a disobedient child, my voice still gentle, patiently reasoning with him. The jellyfish expanded and contracted its bell, helplessly rubbing against my palm through the glass. He seemed a little aggrieved, but having no mouth or eyes, he couldn't even convey his emotions, and became even more anxious. I tapped the glass again. "Do you understand?" The jellyfish stopped moving, floating motionless in front of me. After a long while, he expanded and contracted his bell and left. Why would he suddenly become disobedient? Turning around, I saw the merman had woken up at some point. "You're awake. Does it still hurt?"
What's your name?
"My name is Ro. Ro as in gentle."
Ro. So that's your name.
"What about you? Do you have a number?"
No.
"No number? How could a test subject from Sector S not have a number?" I couldn't help but raise my hand to touch that silk-like long hair. "Will your tears turn into pearls?" The merman looked up at me, seemingly unable to understand the question. "I heard that eating merman flesh can make you live to be 100, or even bring the dead back to life." The merman smiled, his light-colored eyes sparkling in the darkness.
You want to try?
"That wouldn't be appropriate, right?"
Do you really want to try?
"Don't be so fierce. I was just joking." In the second half of the night, the temperature dropped. I started to feel drowsy. Sensing something was wrong, the merman frowned. "What's wrong with you?" I fluttered my eyelids, raised a hand to touch my forehead, and sighed. "I think I'm sick with a fever."
You're sick.
My whole body was burning up. Suddenly, the merman pressed his cool palm against me, and I actually felt a bit more comfortable. I gave a weak smile, and blinked at the merman. "Your hand feels just like a cooling patch."
Does this make you feel a little better?
"I don't know." I lay there with my eyes closed for a while, then suddenly remembered something. I pulled open the drawer. Thank goodness. There was still some fever medication. After I drank it, my consciousness grew even hazier. The uncomfortable sleeping position made me, even in my semi-conscious state, unable to help but frown. In my daze, a shadow slowly rose up. They reached out, slipping their arms under my knees and back, and picked me up. I felt myself being placed very gently onto the sofa. The merman lay beside me, also gradually slipping into a daze. However, things began to change slightly. The injured tail started to heal itself rapidly. Even though this would be a long process, the unconsciously triggered self-defense mechanism made the merman look somewhat different. The jellyfish returned, once again using its soft tentacles to tap against the glass wall. This time, it was more frantic than before, attempting to make some kind of noise. However, the jellyfish's tentacles were so soft that they couldn't wake the two sleeping in sickness no matter what. In the latter half of the night, footsteps woke me up. I pricked up my ears vigilantly, only to hear the footsteps gradually increasing. Someone was coming in. They wore the base security guards' uniforms and held weapons. It was the rescue team. They had finally arrived. "We're over here." Their figures moved, and their eyes quickly locked onto me and the unconscious merman behind the sofa. Then, more people walked in from outside. Strangely, these rescue team members were all wearing thick goggles. The last few people set down an all-metal isolation stretcher with a heavy glass cover next to the merman. The merman was carefully placed onto the metal stretcher by several people and then covered with that airtight glass cover. Whose experimental subject is this merman?
Not quite sure. The only orders we received were to take him away now.
Is he an S-class subject? Unclear. Then where are you taking him?
Taking him for treatment. This is out of humanitarian concern, regardless of his identity and class.
What do you mean? Does this merman not even have a breeder or a lab? Isn't this treatment too poor? He was eventually carried away. The moment the stretcher disappeared around the corner, a sense of weightlessness enveloped my heart without warning. Some sixth sense told me that letting these people take the merman away would be a mistake. Not long after, the medical team took me to the treatment room. When I came out, I was bear-hugged by MOE, who lunged at me.
Ro, I was scared to death. Are you okay? You're not missing any arms or legs, are you?
I'm fine.
The base suffered huge losses this time. Nearly half of the experimental subjects in Area S, which cost a fortune to maintain, died. The labs are all destroyed too.
Why did so many die? Your blue-ringed octopus deserves a huge amount of credit for that. What do you mean?
They checked the surveillance footage he single-handedly took out. Never mind. You'd better find out for yourself. If he finds out, he'll think I'm trying to drive a wedge between you two. He might even retaliate against me like crazy.
It's fine.
The blue-ringed octopus isn't that petty. Don't you know what your own experimental subject is like? How is the way he stares at you every day any different from a wolf staring at meat? If I dared to even touch you, he'd bite me to death.
She made me laugh. While we were talking, we arrived at the place where the blue-ringed octopus was being held. This was yet another place I had never set foot in before. It looked exceptionally heavily guarded and terrifying. A tall, metal tower-like structure, with several heavily armed security guards stationed on every floor. We walked all the way inside, and saw an enormous glass panel. Inside was a metal space the size of a football field. A tiny shadow could faintly be seen pressed against the innermost wall. I couldn't clearly see his condition. MOE chimed in from the side.
She is the top breeder in Sector S. Haven't you guys heard of her?
Seeing their indifferent expressions, she pointed at the blue-ringed octopus inside.
The thing you're guarding so heavily is free range in her office. The kind that crawls all over the floor without a single lock.
What kind of description is that?
You should know that this thing only listens to her. If you don't let her in, what consequences will there be once he recovers? Don't you know? Can you take responsibility for that?
Of course, the security guards wouldn't just take MOE's word for it. They reported to their superiors and then operated the buttons to open the heavy door.
You may go in.
I walked inside. Before seeing him, I had thought that perhaps the blue-ringed octopus had done something terrifying to warrant being locked up in such a heavily sealed underground cage. But the moment I saw the blue-ringed octopus, all the thoughts in my mind vanished into thin air. The young man's hair was wet, curled up on the cold floor. He looked so fragile he could break at any moment. Everywhere I looked, his body was covered in wounds. My breath hitched. He opened his eyes and looked at me.
Ro.
Just this single breathy sound squeezed my heart, filling it with an aching sorrow. What happened? I crouched down in front of the blue-ringed octopus, raising my hand to brush aside the damp, dark green hair on his forehead. A face as handsome as a god's was revealed. Soft, translucent tentacles wrapped around my wrist. I checked his condition and asked, my heart aching, what happened? Did someone hurt you? The blue-ringed octopus didn't say anything, or perhaps he was just too tired. He just quietly pressed against my embrace, and then closed his eyes. MOE quietly sneaked over. He didn't want to break this tender moment, but couldn't help saying,
comfort him as you see fit. But the other test subjects are hurt much worse.
How badly they're hurt has nothing to do with me. But why did they hurt the little octopus?
No. You call him Little Octopus? Yesterday, the base conducted an inspection and pulled the security footage. They found that they were indeed collectively attacking your little octopus. But your little octopus also.
I froze, my voice involuntarily rising. They collectively attacked the blue-ringed octopus?
I think. Then you should let me finish speaking first.
Translucent tentacles quietly crept up my neck, gently yet with extreme possessiveness, turning my face toward him. My emotions gave him a sense of satisfaction, as if he were being cared for. The young man opened his eyes and looked at me.
Look at me.
He said, his voice as weak as a thread. But the pressure of the tentacles made me somewhat suspicious that this octopus was deliberately pretending to be weak. You have to know, these highly intelligent creatures are also top-notch at feigning innocence.
Your little octopus does look injured right now, but currently, there are about over 100 test subjects who have suffered varying degrees of damage because of him.
So over 100 test subjects attacked him yesterday. My focus was a little off track. Manhwa was somewhat speechless.
You should be asking, why was he able to hurt so many experimental subjects all by himself?
That's too much. The blue-ringed octopus is the victim here, and now you're classifying him as a dangerous subject?
Because he really is dangerous.
Manhwa said weakly. I sneered. Look at him. How is he dangerous? The young man opportunely played the role of a frail, bewitching concubine in my arms. I tugged at his tentacle and asked if those experimental subjects hadn't attacked him, would he have actively hurt anyone else? I didn't know if it was intentional, but the tentacle was incredibly soft. The young man drooped his eyelids, looking utterly feeble.
Fine, fine. Fine. Your little octopus is the most innocent and pitiful. What else is there to say?
Manhwa felt physically and mentally exhausted. I, however, was lost in thought. The experimental subjects in Sector S had collectively lost control, and attacking the blue-ringed octopus together was somewhat unbelievable. These marine creatures are very independent, aloof, and non-interfering. Instinct wouldn't make them deliberately attack just one target. So the blue-ringed octopus must have something different from the others that caused him to be collectively targeted. This was one of my guesses. There was another possibility. They might have been agitated by some unknown force to attack him together. If that was really the case, then it meant there was a powerful force beyond human comprehension that was hostile to him. Leaving the tower-like building, I was guided through a secret underground passage to a temporary laboratory. Coming out of the secret passage, I happened to run into a few base security officers. When they saw me holding the hand of a young man who was a special creature, their expressions were extremely shocked, as if they had discovered a new continent.
Wait. Does the base still have free-roaming experimental subjects?
I brought the little octopus into the temporary laboratory. Overall, it was fairly clean and bright. The previous laboratory was severely damaged and would take a few days to repair. You'll stay here for now. The little octopus suddenly looked uneasy again, looking at me with a bit of guilt. He probably thought he was the one who destroyed my lab. I patted his drooping tentacles again. It's not your fault. It was invaded by a strange experimental subject. Manhwa complained helplessly.
Stop enabling him. You foolish tyrant.
After a while, someone knocked on the door.
We're here to take him for an examination.
But the octopus refused to let go of me. All right, I'll go with you. In the scanning pod, his dark green eyes remained open, staring at me eagerly. I couldn't help but reach out and cover his eyelids. Go to sleep. Stop keeping your eyes open. The octopus was quiet for a moment. When I lifted my hand, he opened his eyes again, staring straight at me. The scan will take a long time. Aren't you going to rest? He blinked lightly, his voice a bit muffled.
Ro. Can you call my name?
Elson. Can you rest for a bit? The soft tentacles curled over again, and I gently swatted them away. Don't move. It's scanning. The injured little octopus was very dependent on me. He didn't want to stay lying in the scanning pod and tried to climb out. I pushed him back down. Be good. Don't move around. He finally settled down a bit. Looking at him, I suddenly thought of another heavily injured mermaid. The blue-ringed octopus could get proper treatment, but what about him? So after coaxing the little octopus, I went to the tower-shaped office building to find Professor Sue. Arriving at the silver-white office, I knocked and walked in.
Please sit. I heard. You want to take over a mermaid?
I noticed he seems to be subjected to violence frequently, so I wanted to ask if his caretaking permissions could be transferred to me. Is that not possible?
That doesn't matter. It's not anything important. Is that mermaid really not an important experimental subject?
Then why is he in Sector S?
That doesn't matter. It's not anything important. Go handle the transfer paperwork. Go through the necessary procedures.
Things went so smoothly that I found it unbelievable. Just like that, after I left, the professors discussing their own matters in the office stopped in unison.
Is it her?
It's her.
I sat in the capsule elevator, looking down at the ground from over 100 stories high, still unaware that I had already been drawn into an experiment. Even I myself had become an experimental subject. I followed the senior assistant to the service desk on the middle floor of the building to handle the paperwork. Can I take him away today?
Not today. We still have some data to archive. Wait for the process.
About how long?
1 to 2 days.
What is this mermaid's identity?
This mermaid was fostered by a caretaker in Sector S. He is a defective product from this batch of experiments. He has no value. Fostering record. He doesn't really have any aggressiveness either.
Does he not have a number?
No. Mermaids are very fragile. According to the process, he would soon be eliminated and sent to the disposal center to be executed.
Executed? But that's a mermaid.
He has no value, so he must be executed.
I stood there in shock. A mermaid, whose ornamental value alone is incredibly rare, was actually on the verge of being sent for execution. I lowered my head, lost in thought. I didn't notice the senior assistant's trembling hands as he entered the data, nor the deep-seated fear hidden in his eyes.
Just wait for the rest of the process. You can go see him first now.
Okay. This was the same experimental tank I had visited the first time I entered Sector S. Behind the massive glass surface was a deep blue glow. The senior assistant opened the door for me, but didn't go in himself, waiting outside instead. Along the way, all the security personnel wore special goggles over their eyes, woven from silver metal and microchips. I had no idea what they were used for. Do I need to wear those glasses? The senior assistant paused for a moment and said,
You don't need to.
As soon as I walked in, I heard a click from behind as the door locked. Several solid metal gates sealed shut simultaneously. My heart tightened. Is locking the door a normal procedure? I suppressed the strange feeling in my chest, cautiously approaching the tank, trying to make out that figure in the dim glass enclosure. Yet, I still found nothing. Are you there? No one answered me. My own echo faintly reverberated in the air. I circled the massive, empty glass tank a few times but saw no one. This silence lasted until I was about to leave. Finally, there was a sound behind me. I turned around, and at last, within that water tank, I saw that mysterious figure. The breathtakingly beautiful creature revealed its silhouette, looking at me from a great distance. He swam out from the shadows. The merman raised his hand and pressed it against the glass wall. We stared at each other for a long time. The merman raised his hand and beckoned to me. Then, with a gentle flick of his tail, that mythical shadow floated upward. As if possessed, I climbed the ladder, following the long steel frame all the way up. With a soft splash of water, the merman poked half his head out of the water. Wet blonde hair framed the contours of his face. I reached the hatch and carefully sat on it. Looking into those eyes, I said softly, Long time no see. Do you still remember me? However, those platinum silver eyes hid frost, their gaze very cold. Caught off guard, I met his eyes, like falling into a silver vortex. My mind went blank. A feeling of extreme danger surged in my heart. A low, husky, and moving voice called my name. The merman surfaced and reached out to me. I watched helplessly as his hand slowly landed on my cheek, brushing my long hair past my ear and gently rubbing along my fragile neck. I smelled danger, yet my whole body was stiff and unable to move. Consciousness and body separated, like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Those scrutinizing eyes looked me up and down. The sensation on my neck became clearer and clearer. What did he want to do? Was he angry? Goosebumps rose on the back of my neck. Her fear was transmitted into the merman's eyes. I didn't know if it was an illusion, but he looked even angrier.
Afraid of me?
I felt like I should say something to break the deadlock, but I couldn't open my mouth. He slowly emerged from the water, getting closer and closer, gradually crossing the safety boundary. His thin lips were close at hand, softly spitting out a few words.
Don't be afraid of me. It's been 4 days. You're still disobedient.
The merman raised his eyes to look at me, his gaze complex. I lifted the necklace around my neck and dangled it in front of his eyes. Is this yours? The merman looked a bit dazed and nodded extremely slowly. She was carrying his scale close to her body. I touched that scale and muttered to myself, I can't repay it anymore. 3 times. This scale saved my life once. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I'd probably be gone by now. The merman stared fixedly at my smile. The next second, his eyes widened slightly, looking completely in disbelief. Can I touch you? My hand landed on the merman's hair. I gently hooked a strand and asked a redundant question. To a proud merman, this should have been an incredibly offensive gesture, but coming from me, it didn't stir up the slightest bit of resistance in him. He even seemed to like it. My fingertips gently stroked through his hair, occasionally touching his scalp, bringing him a comfort that made him zone out. He was addicted to my touch, listening to my voice as if I were coaxing a child. In a couple of days, I'll take you away. Come with me, okay? I used the soft tone I used when communicating with my experimental subjects to soothe this seemingly unhappy fish. We just have to wait for the paperwork now. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. And once you're at my place, no one else will hurt you either. The merman narrowed his eyes slightly, his damp, pale cheek subconsciously following my palm, nuzzling it gently. The roles were reversed. He was the one who wanted to take her away. How did it turn out like this? If you don't say anything, I'll take that as a yes. The words slipped out. I felt a sense of familiarity, as if I had just heard them. Looking at the merman's strange expression, my hands itched, and I touched his face again. The merman was still in a daze, his beautiful eyes wide open, staring at me unblinkingly. I felt a bit dizzy under his gaze. That face was incredibly lethal, so beautiful that it became androgynous, making me faintly envious. I tugged at his blonde hair resting on my arm. Why are you spacing out? What are you thinking about? The merman suddenly snapped back to reality, his eyes conflicted, torn between coldness and other emotions. After a moment of silence, he suddenly reached out and cupped my face, bringing his face extremely close. His silver eyes looked deeply into mine, and my thoughts were instantly drawn away. I had no time to react at all. Before I lost consciousness, the merman used coral and shells, built a warm underwater dwelling. Jellyfish settled in the waters outside the dwelling, swimming along with my movements every day. The blue-ringed octopus youth and the sea angel boy were like obedient little dogs, waiting for me to feed them candy every day. The merman was no longer obsessively possessive, just quietly staying by my side, guarding this little world that belonged to us. I was no longer a breeder at the base, no longer a tool for experiments. I was their tenderness, their god, and their only owner.